Welcome to News Beacon, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. On a sweltering July day, President Trump, flanked by his top economic advisors, stepped up to the podium and delivered a message that would send shockwaves across the globe. With the sun beating down and cameras flashing, he announced a 100% tariff on all Chinese imports. A move he called a bold correction to reclaim American jobs and restore what he described as fairness to global trade. The crowd listened, some with hope, others with disbelief, as he declared this was the only way to force China to the negotiating table and protect American workers from what he called decades of unfair competition. The world's reaction was instant panic, not applause. Within minutes, stock markets from Tokyo to Frankfurt plunged as the scale of the announcement sank in. Traders stared at their screens in disbelief, watching billions of dollars in value evaporate in real time. Financial analysts scrambled to make sense of the sudden upheaval, while investors braced for a wave of uncertainty that threatened to ripple through every corner of the global economy. The shock was not limited to financial circles. Businesses, governments, and ordinary citizens everywhere began to wonder what this would mean for their futures. This wasn't a targeted strike. It was a full-blown assault on the world's most critical trade relationship. Cargo ships already en route suddenly became symbols of a new era of uncertainty. Their containers filled with goods now subject to punishing tariffs. Ports braced for chaos as companies scrambled to reroute shipments, renegotiate contracts, and assess the damage. The global supply chain, already stretched thin, now faced a test unlike any before, with ripple effects threatening to disrupt everything from electronics to everyday household goods. The phones at the U.S. Trade Representative's office rang non-stop as allies and rivals alike asked, "Are you serious?" Diplomats and trade officials from around the world demanded clarification, seeking to understand whether this was a negotiating tactic or a new reality. Inside the office, staff scrambled to keep up with the deluge of calls, emails, and urgent requests for meetings. The sense of crisis was palpable as officials realized the magnitude of what had just been set in motion. The global response was confusion and alarm, not solidarity. In capitals from Berlin to Beijing, leaders convened emergency meetings, their faces etched with concern as they tried to chart a path forward. News headlines blared with speculation and uncertainty, while commentators debated whether this was the start of a new economic order or a catastrophic miscalculation. The world, it seemed, was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. For Americans, the move was sold as a path to a manufacturing renaissance, a promise to bring back lost jobs and restore the nation's industrial might. Politicians spoke of new factories and bustling assembly lines, painting a picture of economic revival. But for economists, it was a declaration of war on the very principles of global trade that had underpinned decades of growth and prosperity. They warned of higher prices, retaliatory tariffs, and the risk of a global recession, concerns that were quickly dismissed by the administration as fear-mongering. The U.S. had just pushed all its chips in, expecting allies to follow, only to find itself standing alone at the table. The gamble was enormous, and the stakes could not have been higher. As the dust settled, one thing was clear: the world had entered uncharted territory, and no one knew what the next hand would bring. So, what's a tariff? You've probably heard the word tossed around in the news, especially when countries are arguing about trade. But what does it actually mean, and why does it matter to you? At its core, a tariff is a tax that a government places on goods coming in from other countries, imports. Think of it as a fee that foreign companies have to pay just to sell their products here. The idea is pretty simple. By making imported goods more expensive, tariffs encourage shoppers like you and me to choose products made closer to home, supporting local businesses and workers. President Trump's approach was bold. He decided to slap hefty tariffs on Chinese goods, hoping to shake up the balance of trade between the U.S. and China. The logic? If Chinese products suddenly cost a lot more, Americans might think twice before buying them, and instead reach for something made in the USA. The hope was that this would boost demand for American-made goods, giving a much-needed lift to U.S. factories and workers who had been struggling to compete with cheaper imports. The ultimate goal? To breathe new life into American manufacturing, create more jobs, and restore the country's industrial strength. At the same time, tariffs were meant to put pressure on China, pushing them to play by the rules and negotiate fairer trade deals. But here's the catch: the global economy is a lot more complicated than it looks on paper. Trade isn't just a simple back and forth between two countries. Take a smartphone, for example. It might be assembled in China, but its parts could come from 6 or more countries, including the US, Japan, South Korea, and Germany. When a tariff is slapped on that phone, it doesn't just hit China. It affects every company and worker involved in making those parts, no matter where they're from. And here's another problem. American factories can't just snap their fingers and start making all those parts themselves, especially when it comes to high-tech or specialized components. The reality is, global supply chains are incredibly tangled and interconnected. Changing one link can send shockwaves through the entire system, causing delays, shortages, and higher prices for everyone. Building tariff walls might sound easy on paper, just raise taxes on imports and call it a day. But building new factories, retraining workers, and retooling entire industries, that's a much slower, more complicated process, one that can't happen overnight. The US expected its allies to join the tariff crusade against China. Instead, 27 countries, including Canada, Mexico, the EU, Japan, and Australia, flatly refused. Their reason: tariffs would wreck their own economies and violate international trade law. North American supply chains would shatter, and Europe's export-driven economies would suffer. Asian allies, deeply linked to China, wanted no part of the chaos. This wasn't just reluctance, it was a unified global consensus. America's plan was reckless. These nations weren't defending China, they just saw the US approach as economic self-harm. They chose stability and their own interest over following Washington off a cliff. The US found itself isolated, not leading. Why did the world say no? The answer is a complex cocktail of concerns. 4 major reasons that made global leaders hesitate, each one powerful enough to tip the scales. First, international law. Imposing a unilateral tariff would have directly violated the rules set by the World Trade Organization, the very foundation of global commerce. These rules exist to prevent economic chaos and ensure fair play between nations. Breaking them would not only undermine decades of careful negotiation, but also threaten the stability of the entire global order. For many countries, upholding these agreements is about more than trade. It's about trust and predictability in a world that already feels uncertain. Second, inflation. Tariffs are at their core taxes on consumers. When tariffs go up, so do the prices of everyday goods: food, electronics, clothing, and more. This isn't just an abstract economic concept, it's something that hits families directly at the checkout counter. No leader wants to be responsible for doubling the cost of groceries or making life more expensive for ordinary people. The political fallout would be immediate and severe, with public anger and unrest likely to follow. Third, supply chains. In today's world, economies are deeply interconnected. Products are designed in one country, assembled in another, and sold in dozens more. Cutting China out of this web would cause massive disruption, not just for China, but for every country that relies on these global networks. Factories around the world would grind to a halt, jobs would disappear, and entire industries could collapse overnight. The ripple effects would be felt everywhere, from small businesses to multinational corporations. Finally, retaliation. China isn't just a manufacturing powerhouse, it's also a massive market for global exports. If countries joined the US in this risky move, they risk losing access to millions of customers and billions in trade. The threat of Chinese retaliation was real. Businesses feared being shut out, investments could dry up, and entire sectors might be forced to close or relocate. Faced with these risks, the choice for most countries was clear: protect their own economies, their jobs, and their people. Joining a risky American gamble simply wasn't worth it. No matter the pressure, for nearly every country the answer was obvious. America stood alone, isolated by a world unwilling to risk so much for so little certainty. The tariffs' impact hit Americans fast. Prices on everything from sneakers to microwaves soared. The average household paid about $2,400 more per year, a heavy blow for families. US businesses from Nike to Ford saw costs spike, making them less competitive. Even home prices jumped as tariffs hit building materials. Economic growth slowed sharply, with GDP growth cut in half and business investment stalling. The promised manufacturing boom never arrived. Instead, companies shifted supply chains to other low-cost countries. Jobs didn't flood back, they just moved elsewhere, while Americans paid the price. The tariffs were a tax on the entire US economy. The world didn't just reject America's plan, they made their own. Countries like Mexico and Canada put up targeted barriers to protect themselves from a flood of Chinese goods. The EU focused on de-risking, not cutting China out, but reducing dependence on critical goods. Nations built new trade pacts and diversified supply chains, bypassing US chaos. Instead of a united front, the world splintered into competing blocs. The US tried to force a binary choice, but the world chose a third way: regional deals and resilience. America found itself written out of new trade arrangements, its leadership quietly rebuked. The world moved on, leaving the US to navigate the mess it created. China didn't panic, it retaliated with precision. Beijing slapped tariffs on US farm exports, targeting Trump's political base. More ominously, China restricted exports of rare earth minerals, vital for US tech and defense. The message: hurt us, and we can hurt you where it counts. China also launched a global PR campaign, painting the US as the real disruptor. They signed new trade deals, courting countries alienated by American policy. China proved it could withstand pressure and exploit America's growing isolation. The real cost of the tariff wasn't just higher prices, it was America's isolation. Once the architect of global trade, the US now found itself sidelined as others built new economic bridges. Only a handful of weak trade deals were struck, while major partners turned away. China filled the leadership vacuum, expanding its influence in trade networks. America's allies learned they couldn't rely on Washington's stability. The tariff plan, meant to weaken China, instead strengthened its global position. The world order shifted from US-led to fractured and competitive, with America shouting from the sidelines. The failed tariff plan taught hard lessons. In a connected world, no nation can go it alone. Not even the US tariffs proved to be a blunt, self-destructive tool, hurting American families and businesses. The plan backfired, isolating the US and empowering China. Global supply chains aren't the enemy, they're the lifeblood of modern economies. Real strength comes from building coalitions and investing at home, not from walls and threats. The 2025 tariff saga will be remembered as a cautionary tale. In global trade, trying to lead by force leaves you dancing alone.